Welcome to our sixth session of parish study. And Walter Wagner here, Father Walter Wagner, and together we are reading St. Matthew's Gospel, and we're asking the question, how does Jesus minister to his people? And how is he ministering to us in this time, who are his people, indeed his body? So we've already reached a couple of conclusions about this. One of them is that Jesus ministers to us by drawing on our gifts and using them in his ministry. That is, Jesus makes us ministers alongside him, so that as he ministers to us, we're enabled to minister to others. So we saw last time that in looking at chapters 10 and then chapter 10 and chapter 11 and 12, we saw that this meant we have a mission, and that we will go into the world as bearers of a mission, as bearers of a truth, bearers of a person, Jesus, and that we will have both his attractiveness and his challenges. And that is that you and I are in the world as people who hopefully bear his stamp of candor and his ability to be open and listening before God's plan. Now we said that the bearer of the mission will be commissioned to announce what Jesus announces and what John the Baptist announced before him, which is that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom is coming. The kingdom is here. And that means that people are invited in response to that truth to repent. That is, to make a turn toward the Lord, and as a result, grow in righteousness, which is that harmony with self, others, and God. And that righteousness is the happiness of the Beatitudes. It's the happiness of St. Joseph. It's the happiness of John the Baptist and of Jesus. It's the happiness which is the fulfillment of the law. And Jesus is going to present his teaching as a fulfillment of the law on that basis. That the law is not a burden on people. The law is a way to achieve intimacy, this threefold intimacy that we keep talking about. So that intimacy with self, God, and neighbor, that intimacy is the point of entree. It's the requirement for the life of the kingdom. So you and I, bearing in ourselves this happiness, being missioners alongside Jesus, who is both the one fully possessed of gospel happiness and the one who shares it with us, we as bearers of that happiness announce a kingdom, inviting people to take hold of this happiness and enter this life. But there's a question that comes alive after this whole conversation, which is, if you're announcing the kingdom, what is it? What is this kingdom? And that is a question that Jesus begins to answer in chapter 13. For most of us, a kingdom is a political structure. So we would say, if someone asked us what the kingdom is, well, we would say it's got these boundaries and it's ruled in this way, and those who are in it have these rights and these responsibilities, and so forth. That's a current reflection on political reality as we pass through an election and we're going through a presidential transition. But Jesus does not give that kind of an answer. Jesus tells us what the kingdom is like by using parables. Jesus describes the way of living that we are headed for, in fact, already begin to possess in baptism and the Holy Eucharist. Jesus describes this way of life not in the terms of political structure, but drawing on images of life such as people in his time would know, and by taking what is familiar and, if you will, turning it on its side a little bit, to take ordinary life and reconfigure it, or re-image it, so that people realize God is taking what is ordinary among us and making it a vehicle to what is beyond our imagining or our own speculation. And we call these images parables. It's a kind of a simile. This is like this. But it makes a point, the parables make a point about the life of the kingdom, but they don't give an answer. That's the key phrase for me as we talk about the parables. In them, Jesus makes a point, but doesn't give an answer. An answer has finality. 2 + 2 = 4, and that's the end of the conversation. A parable makes a point, but also leaves open this fact that registering the significance of the point will not come in a moment, but take a lifetime. So that the parables are designed really to be companions for a journey. So that as you look at the spectrum of parables presented in chapter 13, you probably hear vignettes that you have heard preached about for your whole life. And you and the preacher together have grown year by year in appreciating the sower who went out to sow, and the weeds sown among the wheat, and the pearl of great price. You know, it's like you look at the gospel and you say, here it is again. And what meaning will I draw from it now? And it's not that the meaning shifts completely from year to year. It's that we grow deeper year by year into the same meaning. So in that sense, the parables have an iconic quality that repays a prolonged view of them. So they make a point, but they don't give an answer. And so one of the questions we can ask is, why does Jesus minister to us and then minister through us to others by using parables? It's an important question to answer, and it's a question that he answers himself. On page, let's see, if you look at page 75 in our commentary, the disciples, I'm at chapter 13, verse 10. The disciples approached Jesus and said, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" He said to them in reply, "Because knowledge of the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven has been granted to you, but to them it has not been granted. To anyone who has, more will be given, and he will grow rich. From anyone who has not, even what he has will be taken away. That is why I speak to them in parables, because they look, but they do not see, and hear, but do not listen or understand. Isaiah's prophecy is fulfilled in them, which says, You shall indeed hear, but not understand. You shall indeed look, but never see. Gross is the heart of this people. They will hardly hear with their ears. They have closed their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and be converted, and I hear them." It's a perplexing thing. It's almost like Jesus is designing his ministry to exclude people. You would think that he would want to make it as easy as possible to become his follower and to attain his promises. But here he is, using images that he knows will stump some of the hearers. And so why does he do it? And why is that an important kind of ministry? So that's our question for this conversation. I hope you'll also read the commentary here, to read all of the parables, and spend some time discerning each of their meaning, each of the kind of identifying the point they want to make and how it applies to you at this moment in your life. And your commentary, I think, can help you a great deal with that. But that is not our goal at this time. Our goal is to ask, why does Jesus minister in parables? And why does this choice matter to us at this moment? And the beginning of an answer is to consider who has been given the capacity to understand the parables. So Jesus says that at the beginning of that passage I just read, knowledge of the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven has been granted to you, but to them it has not been granted. So it's been granted to those who are his disciples, those who have signed on to go the distance with him, not to be with him just for one talk or one miracle, but who are following him through his whole ministry. The point is, that's what it takes to understand Jesus. that our humanity grasps what he is offering, not instantly. It may lay hold of it immediately, but comprehending the full significance of it takes us time. It takes us time. And so that is why part of the ministry of Jesus is to us is inviting us to go the distance with him. And so the disciples, having signed on to do this, have been initiated into what we call mysteries. So it's not just the teachings, it's not just the requirements, it's the mysteries. That is, I am signing on to follow Jesus because I'm believing that as I go through my life with him, he is going to unfold the truth about God, about my neighbor, and about me, right? The happiness, that threefold happiness, will keep deepening as he shows me the ramifications of following him in the company of his other followers on the way to God. So that will be hard for people who want immediate answers, who want in a one-sentence answer, what does it take to be saved? Or what are the requirements for me to get into heaven? Who want a simple list. That entering fully into what Jesus is offering takes more than that. See, and it's in that light that we can grasp the first of the parables. See what Jesus is about here. The parable of the sower who went out to sow, with which he begins this whole conversation. Just read this real quick. On that day, Jesus went out of the house and sat down by the sea. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat down, and the whole crowd stood along the shore. And he spoke to them at length in parables, saying, A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky ground where it had little soil. It sprang up at once because the soil was not deep. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and it withered for lack of roots. Some seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it. But some seed fell on rich soil and produced fruit 100 or 60 or 30-fold. Whoever has ears ought to hear. Now, your commentator is going to point out that this passage, chapter 13, contains an explanation of this parable, which is one of the few given in Matthew's gospel. And that's going to follow at verse 18. The seed sown on the path is the one who hears the word of the kingdom without understanding it, and the evil one comes and steals away what was sown in his heart. The seed sown on rocky ground is the one who hears the word and receives it at once with joy. But he has no root and lasts only for a time. When some tribulation or persecution comes because of the word, he immediately falls away. The seed sown among thorns is the one who hears the word, but then worldly anxiety and the lure of riches choke the word, and it bears no fruit. The seed sown on rich soil is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields 100 or 60 or 30-fold. So, Jesus gives us an explanation here. your commentator thinks the explanation is probably provided by Matthew's community. But in any case, the explanation makes clear what the point is, but it doesn't give an answer. It doesn't give you a recipe. It doesn't say, this is what it takes to be fertile soil for the word such that it bears fruit. How do you get the roots? How do you get the endurance? How do you get the perspective that allows you to push through anxiety and avarice? And the answer is not that you follow 3 easy steps, but simply that you turn your life over to Jesus, which is what his disciples did. That you become fertile by going the distance. And if that seems a faraway concept, think of what it means, just to think of this. Think of what it means to show up at Mass every Sunday, whether you feel like it or not, whether the weather is good or it's not, whether the sermon is good or it's not. But to come to Mass because you recognize that Holy Communion, the mystery of the Eucharist and Holy Communion, is at the core of going the distance with the Lord. And that through that practice, in season and out of season, wherever you are on the roller coaster of life, that practice is in the end what is going to open us to the working of the Word. And it's that choice in repeated practice to be available to what God wants to do with it. So that one Sunday maybe nothing happens. The next Sunday there's a tremendous insight. The following Sunday, something in between. But the point is that the walk with Jesus is that. It's a walk over years and through every aspect of life. And that means that we don't have with him finality. We don't have a sense of being done, of being complete, of having an entire comprehension of what he is about, of being done growing, etc. The life with him is always open-ended, you see. And because if you look at it in human terms, you're never done being intimate. You can always be more intimate with self, God, and neighbor. So that becomes a way of perceiving both the fact of the parable making a point and the parable not giving an answer. And that going the distance, being willing to be in the unfolding of the kingdom, becomes something that Jesus makes us able to do if we accept it. The kingdom as something which unfolds is going to be in the images we encounter in the parables. So that's a lens for looking at this whole chapter for us, for our point in this conversation. to say, I am willing to live with an open-ended reality because Jesus is the end. Not a result, but an end. So with that in mind, let me just review my notes, make sure I got all this apart, got all this over to you. Yeah. Wanted to say the ministry of Jesus is not primarily to give answers, but to summon people into a living relationship with the truth who is God, which means truth will be unfolded through repeated experiences from him to us. So just think about the parables we then go on to encounter in chapter 13. The weeds and the wheat. What is the advice of the landowner? Wait, right? The obvious thing to do is rip the weeds out before they get a foothold. The landowner says, wait. See how this unfolds, right? So the kingdom is not a matter of me trying to decide myself who the good guys and the bad guys are. The kingdom is me entrusting that whole field to God's hand. And to addressing myself to being fruitful and constant in my place in the field. But it is a growth which will unfold over time. And I won't have the immediate satisfaction of seeing the bad people get theirs. It is rather the entrustment of self and others to the unfolding, or to the entrustment of self and others to this plan of God, in the trust that the plan will unfold in his way. You see? And then the other images that come to us in the parables follow this same plan, because you think about not only the weeds and the wheat, but you also think about the mustard seed, right? That the mustard seed is, as your commentator points out, not really a great big huge tree that you look at, but spreads right under your nose all around you, right? But it gradually covers more and more ground. Likewise, the woman kneading the dough with the leaven in it is causing the leaven to infiltrate, permeate the dough. In both of these are taking the long term that the kingdom is going to spread as people are prepared to be taken on the trip of it, right? On the journey of this unfolding reality in which more and more of life is touched by the gospel. You see, and I think that maybe describes everybody's journey, is that the gospel touches more and more of the compartments of my life and makes them not to be compartments. So it reaches into my boardroom and my office and my sitting room and my study and my bedroom. And it gets into every relationship, right? The gospel does. So it's like the mustard growing everywhere. But it's also true that it gets all through me on the inside, so that gradually there is no compartment apart from God. Now you see, that is what Jesus tells me I have to sign on for. That over time I will be overtaken and infiltrated by him and his teaching and his ministry. But if I knew at the outset what that would be like, I probably would run away. But I grab the promise in the understanding that it will unfold in me as I am held by God to be ready for the takeover and the infiltration. And then you can see too in that the treasure buried in the field and the pearl of great price, this other way of taking the long view. That is, not only will it take over every area of my life, but it will become, over time, the priority of my life. That's what the merchant recognizes. That's what the finder of the treasure in the field recognizes. That this gradually will become more valuable than anything else and more highly prized than anything else. So that part of the kingdom is the transformation of priorities. And I'm fertile ground for that if I'm opening myself to that kind of transformation, and I'm willing to cooperate with it. So I just did an overview of the parables here, leading up to the final one, which is the parable of the fish in the net. The kingdom of heaven is like a net thrown into the sea, which collects fish of every kind. When it is full, they haul it ashore and sit down to put what is good into buckets. What is bad, they throw away. Thus it will be at the end of the age. The angels will go out and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into a fiery furnace where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Do you understand all these things? And they answered, well, yes. And he replied, then every scribe who has been instructed in the kingdom of heaven is like the head of a household who brings from his storeroom the new and the old. And when Jesus finished these parables, he went away from them. The sorting out of the fish is another image of time. It is not us who will sort the fish, but the angels will. Meanwhile, we are in the net with all kinds of good fish and bad fish. And being in the net with them, we don't fully know which is which. It's like the wheat and the weeds. But what Jesus is saying is that if I sign on to this life of the kingdom, I will have these treasures which will enable me to see God at work. The treasures being the parables, that like my companions, so that I can see God at work in time through every age. Right? I become, in a theological sense, in a spiritual sense, a master historian. That is, I'm able to look at the panorama of the Bible and see how God is leading us in general, and me in particular, to more beatitude. That is the happiness of righteousness. And that means that perspective gives me the serenity and the security to be like a person who is a custodian of treasure, who can bring out what is needed when it's needed. And so we can take from this, I think, the idea that the ministry of Jesus is to harness all of our complexity in recognizing and becoming part of the unfolding life that God is bringing to all of us in general and to each of us in particular. And that means that we commit to constant growth, constant heightening of awareness, and constant conversion as a result of it. And this is to be fertile for the word, but it is also to be challenging for people who look to religion in a give me the answers kind of way. And to understand why it is that our own Catholic Christianity is presented to us not just as a code of ethics, not just as a spiritual program or a seminar, but as a way of life. And so that our living of that life represents the fertility of the seed, which is the word, and the growth that is the wheat in the field, and the spreading of the mustard of plants, and the permeation of the dough, and the decision over time to buy the field for the treasure and the pearl at great price. And that kind of growth into a life becomes something we receive as a gift to us, and then offer to people, showing them a way in which they can discover not only who God is, but discover how God sees them to be and calls them to be, which is happy. Thank you for listening to this short conversation about parables and why Jesus ministers in the form of parables, to empower us to walk the distance with him and experience alongside him the unfolding of God's plan. What I'd like to do next in our next session is go on into chapters 14 and 15. And we'll keep up giving updates. We'll keep on giving updates and taking a look at questions that you might have. Many thanks, and we'll talk to you very soon. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth.